All right, now we have everybody, and 7:15, we will call the public hearing to order. This is a substitute ordinance on behalf of Gastro Park LLC, amending the zoning standards applicable to food truck parks, and the applicant has also requested a waiver of the required fees pursuant to Section 17750M. Start with a roll call, Ms. LeBreau.
Mr. Barnes.
Present.
Ms. Cantor.
Here.
Mr. Davidoff.
Here.
Mr. Dodge.
Here.
Ms. Fay.
Here.
Ms. Kerrigan. Mr. Sweeney. Mr. Winograd. And Mr. Williams.
Here.
Thank you, Ms. LeBreau, and we will begin with a presentation from the applicant.
Wasn't sure what you guys were seeing over here. All right. Well, first and foremost, thank you for your time this evening and your efforts to this point in time and helping this concept become a reality here in West Hartford. I really don't have as much of a presentation as much as just kind of an explanation of what exactly it is we're trying to do. And I wanted to have a couple of visual aids just because, obviously, the concept that we're tapping into is nothing new, but it is certainly new for Connecticut standards. And the term food truck park often paints a certain picture in people's minds. Really what we're creating is essentially the same type of experience you would find at a West Hartford restaurant, but instead of being serviced by a kitchen that is, bolted into the ground, it is serviced by a group of mobile kitchens. Run by small business owners, chefs, people who are pursuing their entrepreneurial dream and are serving food that is, arguably just as good that you would get at a brick and mortar restaurant. So it's still that same level of quality. It's still that same level of experience that people are used to experiencing in West Hartford and other reputable towns. So tonight's, question to amend the food truck park ordinance, for me personally, is, less about the questions about allowing the sale of beer and wine and/or amending the parking restrictions for the ordinance. But it's for me, it's most importantly about empowering small business growth. The cost of doing business is obviously rising. There's a lot of barriers to entry for people who want to be entrepreneurs and open their own small business. And I look at the Gastro Park as an avenue for both new businesses and existing businesses to expand their concepts. Connecticut currently has one food truck park by my definition of the concept. It's a seasonal outfit and it's based in Stamford, Connecticut, and it was actually opened by a restaurant group. One of their restaurants is Tequila Mockingbird in New Haven, Connecticut, and they opened this up as a way to operate a food truck out of their brick and mortar restaurant. So the Gastro Park is going to be a place for small businesses of all kinds, whether it's a startup or somebody looking to grow and scale their business. We have a flat fee model. So vendors who come to sell at the Gastro Park will pay 12% of whatever they do on a daily basis. So we are in the risk game with them. If it rains and they don't do so well, we're in it together. So that's really the number one initiative for the Gastro Park, is to create a small business ecosystem that can promote growth and, a good feeling among small businesses that are trying to help create a sustainable environment here in our local community. Number two is community. Creating another place. West Hartford has many of them already, but I think we would all agree that there's never a shortage of areas that we can create to bring the community together. And the location of the Gastro Park, 637 New Park Avenue, while it doesn't look like much now, we fully intend to transform into an indoor-outdoor space with amenities that will be great for families, young business professionals, people who need a quick meal on a budget, or people who are looking to spend 2 or 3 hours sampling food from different trucks, playing a round of bocce ball, getting to experience other people in their community who are like-minded. Food is one of the things that we unite around. Food crosses over all cultures. So I think food is a very important implement that can be used for breaking down barriers across all different types of boundaries. Lastly, these Food truck park is a term that obviously, is probably the easiest way to describe this model. But really what we're trying to do is create an experiential dining concept. And that's really what's happening throughout the entire country. These new type of concepts are not going to replace restaurants because they offer a completely different style of service. Just like a fast food restaurant is never going to be able to come in town and, put Max Oyster Bar out of town. There's an experience for everything, just like the experiential dining movement. So breweries are a great example that are very mainstream and sweeping throughout Connecticut. But we have food halls. There's going to be a food hall opening up later this year in the west end of Hartford. Beer gardens. There's a beer garden opening up at Bushnell Park seasonally this summer. Pop-up restaurants, short-term, taking over a quarter, mixing it up, fusion. There's a lot of, smorgasbord. There's a lot of really cool things going on right there. And if West Hartford wants to remain to be an attractive source for, families and individuals who want to live here, we need to stay progressive with that in mind and make sure that we're bringing these, innovative but also attractive concepts to this town. So I'll leave you with a visual. There's only one other slide to this deck. We can click over to that. I don't know if I have the capabilities up. I do. Amazing. So this is a visual rendering of what the Gastro Park will look like. So you can see that the last time that we came and spoke here was about 2 years ago, and there were some people that were worried that operating a food truck park meant you were essentially undercutting the competition. As you can see, we're going to have a substantial indoor facility because for our model to remain sustainable, we need to be able to open year-round. So while our outdoor footprint, I think, is certainly a great differentiator for what we're going to be able to offer, having that large indoor area that comes with the same overhead of operating a traditional brick-and-mortar restaurant is certainly alive and well here at the Gastro Park at 637 New Park Avenue. Lastly, the last thing I'll say actually is we're requesting to waive the fee for the request because we are operating a small business and we've been going through this process for quite some time, and we've recently had to erect a rather large retaining wall along the back side of our property, and we had to spend about $70,000 on this retaining wall. And this retaining wall was to basically carve out 16 parking spaces along the southern border of the lot that we own. And this was to replace the parking spaces that were originally on the northern side of the lot, closest to the road, because our property falls in the TND zoning overlay. So because of that, we have to have all our parking in the rear. So it has set us back quite a bit. So we were asking for this one consideration at this time. That's all I have. I certainly encourage anybody to reach out to me at any point to ask any questions. I would certainly love to share our vision and how we think you can be influential in moving West Hartford forward and keeping it the great town that it is. Tate Norden, 183 Webster Hill Boulevard.
Thank you, Tate. We're going to have a sign-up sheet, and you may want to respond to I don't know, but we'll see. Ed, well, first of all, before you, I didn't know if anyone had any questions for Tate before sign-up sheet? Okay, Tate, can you come back up? Mr. Barnes has a question to start.
Hello, Tate.
Hi.
I remember whether it was a year or two ago when you were here and we approved this. Can you just tell us what's been going on over the last year or two with the project? Has it opened at all? Have there been any, sale of food on the parcel? What's been going on?
Has not opened. So we purchased, spring of 2017 is when the food truck park ordinance went into place, I believe. Prior to purchasing, or prior to the ordinance being written, we presented the 637 New Park Avenue property to the town and said, this is where we were planning to do it. Please let us know if there's any issues with this lot. Seemed to be fine and clear. Then we closed on the property in August of 2017, and since that point in time, we've been working with the town to draft a site plan that met all of the zoning requirements for the area. It was then in early portion of this year that we learned about the TND, so we had to kind of go back to the drawing board and scrap our parking plan and figure out a new way, and that's when we decided to erect the retaining wall, which we had to dig into the backside of this hill and build a 10-foot retaining wall basically along the length of the property. So we've been working on getting our site plan approved, as well as raising the financial funds to build out the property, as well as figuring out a plan with MDC to connect the property to the sewer line.
Okay. And was beer and wine part of the original proposal?
So the original concept for the Gastro Park was to have a full bar, and there would be a restaurant essentially inside. So the restaurant would have a kitchen that would serve as a regular kitchen that you would find in any restaurant, and there would be a bar as well. But in addition to that, there would be food trucks rotating outside. So the kitchen inside would not be at the same scale as, a 200-seat restaurant, but it would be built to handle a portion of the load. Since we've now had to shift significant funds into this retaining wall to make the parking work, we now are essentially not proposing at this time to put in a kitchen at the Gastro Park, because there's significant cost, obviously, with building out that type of facility. We have the space carved out for future use, where we would like to have a kitchen that could be used for commissary purposes, so food trucks could rent it out to do their commercial prep, because that is an important need right now in the marketplace, especially with new trucks opening every single year. So for now, there will not be a kitchen inside, and the trucks will always be there vending. So originally, we were planning to have a full bar, but now we're requesting just for the beer and wine license, because we believe that the model is being proven out up the road at the brewery, where they are strictly serving beer. They have a food truck there vending. Our model will be a little bit different in that we'll have multiple trucks. It'll still be in that same daily rotation, but the business model is really kind of consistent throughout the United States for this type of food truck avenue. Trucks either pay a fixed fee or a percentage, and then the owner of the property has some type of, exclusion on the sale of beverages.
Okay. And the fee waiver that you're seeking, do you know how much that is?
I believe it's just a little under $1,000.
I just want to clarify, I think, Matt, I had asked that question, and I thought you said it was 550?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, 550.
550. Great. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for Tate while he's up? Okay, then we will go
Thank
to
you.
thank you. Tate, you did sign up, but I think you have done that. And so if you would like to speak to this public hearing, bless you, you have 3 minutes to speak, and you state your name and address for the record. You need to be a West Hartford resident to speak, otherwise we can suspend the rules to allow you to speak. The first person that signed up is Preston McCarthy. If you signed up and you thought it was attendance, that's fine. You don't have to speak. If that happens. So Preston, no? Okay. All right, that's the only person that I had other than Tate. Is there anybody else that would like to speak to this public hearing? All right. With that, I'm sorry? Mr. Allaire.
I just wanted, on the question of the fee waiver, there may be a difference in the number Mr. Norden is talking about and the number Mr. Hart is talking about. We can waive our fees, but the state of Connecticut imposes a surcharge on some of our fees, which we cannot waive. And so the larger number referred to by Mr. Norden may include the state's fee that we can't waive. I think our fee is $550.
Thank you, Mr. Allaire. That's a good clarification. All right. I'd like to read into the record a letter dated June 4th, 2019 from TPZ recommending approval, and letter dated June 24th, 2019 from CROG finding no apparent conflict. Is there any other question? Are there any other questions for the applicant?
Yeah, actually,
Yes, Mr. Barnes.
Thank you. Are there stated reasons for a waiver or bases for a waiver that we consider in, I guess, considering this request?
No. The fee waiver ordinance basically allows the agency receiving the application to waive the fees based on the applicant's circumstances, but there are no criteria set forth in the ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything else? And so we will be voting in the council meeting, we will be voting on the two separate. One is the amended ordinance, and then the second is the fee waiver.
That's correct.
All right, and with that, we will close the public hearing, and we will, everybody ready to start the council meeting as we flip our, thank you, Mr. Nguyen, and get to our screen. Ah, I flipped out. Ah. I don't have my cheat sheet here. Call the 6:25 council meeting to order, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, Ms. LeBeau?
Mr. Barnes.
Present.
Ms. Cantor?
Here.
Mr. Davidoff?
Here.
Mr. Dodge?
Here.
Ms. Fay?
Here.
Ms. Kerrigan? Mr. Sweeney? Mr. Winograd? And Mr. Williams?
Here.
Thank you, Ms. LeBeau. 2A, Ms. Carrigan.
Sorry. June 11, 2019, the public hearing application 527 Prospect Avenue 5-28-2019, and the public hearing resolution neighborhood assistance grant application 528, 2019.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Number 3, Ms. Kerrigan. Oh, it's public forum, sorry. Do we have, you are allowed to speak as long as you are a West Hartford resident. Again, if you're not West Hartford resident, we can waive the rules to speak on anything on the agenda, not the subject of a public hearing, and it is blank. Is there anybody that would like to speak to anything on the agenda that's not the subject of the public hearing? Okay. We will go to 5A, Ms. Kerrigan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move adoption of a substitute ordinance on behalf of Gastro Park LLC, amending the zoning standards applicable to the food truck park.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. We just had it usually don't have the public hearing and the meeting so quickly together, so I don't think I have to explain that much. Anyway, this is a request for this substitute ordinance allowing beer and wine, and then also the waiver of the fee that we will be voting on separately. Is there anybody that would like to say anything? Mr. Williams?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Norden, for your presentation. A few years ago when this came up, as you referenced in your presentation, there was concerns from some of the restaurants on New Park and then New Britain Avenue that this would adversely impact their business, and they voiced objection. I thought that was fair, particularly at the time, because one of the things they were saying is, hey, look, we're not going to have a food truck park in other neighborhoods or areas in the town where there are restaurant competitions, and I know those folks in the New Britain area sometimes feel like they don't get the same attention as some of the other areas. So, some time has passed. We don't have the same objections. As you referenced, there's a brewery nearby with food truck nearby. You would think that if there was an adverse business impact on those restaurants who voiced objections the last time, they'd be even stronger this time. And so I'm happy to support it this time around. I appreciate your presentation, and just want to put my comments on the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Okay, anybody else? Ms. Kerrigan?
Thank you, Mr. Davidoff. Thank you, Tate, for investing in West Hartford, for keeping West Hartford innovative, keep us desirable. We are fortunate to have someone that understands the evolving eating market There's a big difference between drive-through and the dining experience, as you referenced at Grant. So we're fortunate that someone like yourself is willing to invest in our town to keep us desirable. And I'm excited about having the opportunity to go there and bring my kids and enjoy a night out. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dodge.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And Tate, I just want to thank you, along with Ms. Kerrigan, for your investment that you've made, that you're making in West Hartford. And, something that you said struck me too. A few weeks ago, we approved a cottage food ordinance. And one of the things I found appealing about that was the idea that, in essence, it was sort of a food small business incubator, that our hope is that people will engage in this cottage food industry and then hopefully find some success and then move on to a brick and mortar storefront operation. And, my hope is that your food park perhaps has the same effect, that folks can, at a smaller scale, maybe start off with a food truck, and then be able to, if it's successful, move on to build a brick and mortar restaurant here in town. And so, I like that concept of this as an incubation system or sort of a small business ecosystem. And so I wish you all the success in the world, Tate, and also hope that many of the vendors that participate in your project also find success here in town. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dodge. Anybody else? Oh, okay. Ms. Fay.
Thank you. Hi, Tate. I love this idea. I traveled quite a bit out west and seen things like this in operation. They're a lot of fun. They attract a lot of people. They're different than what we already have. It's a nice complement. Certainly pro-business, so I love the idea of giving smaller businesses a good opportunity to be successful. So I like this idea on a multitude of grounds. I think the other thing, though, that's very important, aside from being a business startup, is we have a bunch of dining venues here in West Hartford. We're known as the dining mecca, and that's something that we're all very, very proud of, as well as our residents enjoy. But I like the idea of having a different price point than what we are used to. Now, we do have fast, casual and Chick-fil-A and things like that, but this is kind of a tweener, if you will. It's in the middle, where people, like millennials, I'm trying to think of folks who may not be able to go out very often into the center where the restaurants are at a different price point. They can go here and have just as great an experience, but more affordable for people just getting going in their careers. So, and for seniors, people who are on a fixed budget. So I like this for a multitude of reasons. I've been to them. They're very enjoyable. I could see, perhaps I'm getting ahead of myself, but music out there at some point. But I think it's a great idea, and welcome to West Hartford.
Thank you, Ms. Fay. Mr. Barnes.
I think this question is for the town manager or Mr. Allaire. Have we received any objections or anybody commented on this proposal?
We have not.
Okay. And I too, think it's a great idea. I love the rendering. Looks like it's going to be a great place. With respect to the fee waiver, though, I'm not sure that. I guess the stated reason was because you're a small business, and I'm wondering if, that meets the criteria. I wonder if we set the bar, at that point that every small business is going to come in and request a fee waiver of this sort. And I guess it would have to fall into this situation where they're seeking an amendment to an ordinance to do it. But, if you could comment on that. I'm worried about setting a precedent with this fee waiver that may kind of swallow the whole, basis for the fee.
It's hard to tell whether you're looking at Mr. Hart or me.
I'm looking at both you guys. And anyone, or you guys can not comment. I just thinking out loud. I'm just wondering whether it's a good idea to set a precedent by waiving a fee in this case, and if you want to comment.
A couple points that I would offer. As Mr. Allaire explained, there really isn't any criteria set out in the ordinance. I checked today. We've only granted a fee waiver in a limited number of circumstances. I believe one was for a nonprofit, and then more recently to Delamar, because recall they had missed a 90-day requirement and had to come back in. But we've had very limited experience here. One thing I would point out, though, that if the town had proposed this amendment, which is typically the case, typically we're the ones sponsoring ordinances, then there wouldn't be a fee.
Okay. And can you tell me why, in this case, the town's not supporting? If the idea was brought to the town, could the town have then took it upon itself to amend the ordinance?
I think if time had permitted, yes, but my understanding from the applicant wanted to move forward. I imagine if we had more time to run it through the community planning committee, et cetera, it might very well have been a town-sponsored amendment.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Mr. Davidoff.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. For the record, I think it's important to note that the amendments which are proposed seek to eliminate the current parking requirements for 2 parking spaces per food truck. I fully support that. If that was not amended, it would make it very difficult on this site for this type of operation to be successful. So I think that's a very important component of the amendment this evening. And the other part was the discussion about to permit the sale of beer and wine at food truck parks. And that needs to be in the ordinance in order for him to be, for this food park, gastro park to be in compliance, to have the ability to sell alcohol on site, and it needed to be in our ordinance. So I thank Mr. Norton for raising these 2 issues that will make his gastro park a venture that has the potential to be successful. I think the key word that he used this evening was experiential dining. I think we're going to see a lot more experiential dining and experiences in town. Millennials expect that. It's a new way of living in this country, and there's always something more exciting on the horizon, and this is just one thing to do that. I don't know if it's appropriate to talk about the fee waiver, but I will, because I know we're going to have a motion, but I'll do it here at this point. Our regulations require that we need to give a reason as to why we're waiving the fee, and I think I would concur with the manager that had the town proposed this ordinance with those 2 proposed amendments, there would not have been a fee because we would have been the applicant and not Mr. Norton this evening. So I think that's a key point, and that would be the reason that I would support the fee waiver at this point. And Mr. Lair is correct, we can't waive the fees that are imposed as a surcharge by the state of Connecticut. So those are important things to get onto the record with the reasoning behind that. And I think it's really, really important to commend you for all the efforts that you undertook on your own while you were going through the process of purchasing the property, dealing with the MDC, learning about all the things, and at the 11th hour sort of learning about the TND overlay and how that would affect your project. And had these amendments not been able to take place, then your project probably would have been dead on arrival, or we wouldn't be moving forward this evening. So I was on TPZ when, or I came on right after the TND zone was proposed for Elmwood, and all the reasons that that zone was imposed dealt more with, in my opinion, Elmwood Center, close to like the Elm Theater and the shops that are close to the park there. I think it's Blanchfield Park, and I think that's where a lot of the traditional neighborhood design district elements were, not on New Park Avenue to extend there so that it would have such a restrictive ability. So I commend you because you're just a lay person who's just trying to operate a business, okay? And this interface with the government is sort of foreign and it's frustrating at times, and it's been a long time since we initially spoke to tonight, but I think that it's important to realize that government does work slowly, but in the end, I think you can, when you work within the confines of it, you can accomplish a lot, and I commend you. I think that there will be the votes here this evening to adopt your proposed amendments, and I thank you for working with town staff to accomplish that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davidoff. Anybody else? Mr. Sweeney?
I just have a question. So, Ms. Hart, you said that there's a recent precedent with the when was that with the Delmont?
So the Dalamar application, that was in what, the past 6 months or so, I believe. They recall council approved some amendments to the conditions of their permit, and they needed to file, I believe it was a map within 90 days, something to that effect. They missed that deadline, so they had to refile. In that instance, you agreed to waive the fee.
That's within the last 5 years?
Oh, that was in the past 6 months or so? Do you
I
want
think it was a little
to
over than
clarify,
that.
Mr. McGovern?
Evening, Mark McGovern, Community Development Director. It was actually in 2018. It's one of the several amendments that they had on their SDD. There's a public hearing related to it, and all applicants who have approvals have to file their plans within 90 days, and they didn't do that. They didn't get that done, so they had to have it reheard, and we had to go through the process again in a duplicate hearing. And on that basis, knowing that the council had just dealt with this a few months prior, a request for a fee waiver was granted
So we have precedent of this in the last year?
in the last year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Mr. Barnes?
Mr. McGovern, in that situation, my understanding was they had paid the fee the first time and then had to refile because they missed the deadline, and the waiver was with respect to paying the fee again, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Anybody else? Okay, so I would like to also thank Mr. Norton for his significant investment in this property and significant patience also. I know this is a new concept for Connecticut and for not only for Mr. Norton, but also for staff, and a challenging property, I think, in some ways. So I really, really appreciate everybody working together to come up with a way to make the model work. This is it really is an exciting idea, and it is I think the three things that Tate talked about was the really flourishing entrepreneurship, and I really remember this woman who spoke about her food truck and how she shared her love through food, and it's true. When you go to a food truck, it's really a labor of love in many ways, as are restaurants too. But it's more intimate in many ways because you see the chef, you see the business owner right there. Building of community is so important, and the experiential dining concept, it allows multi-generational people to be entertained all day long. We actually were at my nephew was in the Air Force, was married in Lee Summit, and we had 4 generations of people with us, and we were, what are we going to do for 3 hours while we're in between the service and we found a food truck park, and we hung out there for hours, and it was a way to keep my 89-year-old mother entertained and a 2-year-old nephew entertained, and it was really a great way to, and all the people in between, and my own millennial children that enjoyed the beer very much. So I do see this being a great asset to the town, and I want to, again, thank you for your investment and your patience. Again, the model of food and food trucks and wine and beer, we see it all over now with breweries. So it's something that we see in our neighboring Hartford, and we see down the street in West Hartford, and all throughout the state. So I do think this will be a leader in other ideas, and again, I think it's a great idea. As far as the waiver goes, I do think this is a little different than some other things that we've heard, because this was a town ordinance that we're amending. It's not really the ordinance specific. It is sort of the specific ordinance for this spot, but it's also an umbrella ordinance for the town. And so in that case, I do believe that the waiver should and apply to this particular situation. So with that, we will call for a roll call vote, Ms. LeBreau, on the adoption of the substitute ordinance.
Mr. Barnes?
So is the first one voting?
Is the ordinance.
For the ordinance, the
Yes.
amended ordinance. The next we will vote on the fee.
Thank you. Yes.
Ms. Cantor?
Yes.
Mr. Davidoff?
Yes.
Mr. Dodge?
Yes.
Ms. Fay?
Yes.
Ms. Kerrigan? Mr. Sweeney? Mr. Winograd?
Yes.
And Mr. Williams?
Yes.
It's anonymous. Now on the fee waiver, Mr. Barnes?
No.
Ms. Cantor?
Yes.
Mr. Davidoff?
Yes.
Mr. Dodge?
Yes.
Ms. Fay?
No.
Ms. Kerrigan?
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney? Mr. Winograd?
Yes.
And Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
7-2 pass.
Okay. Thank you very much. Congratulations, Ms. Norton. We look forward to playing bocce ball and having a beer and
Yes.
some wonderful food. Okay, 5B, Ms. Carrion.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move adoption of a resolution approving a West Hartford Complete Streets policy exception for the Mountain Road at Albany Avenue intersection improvement project.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Mr. Hart?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to spend a few minutes on this one if I could. So this was tabled from the last meeting, as council will recall. You wanted more time to review this more thoroughly with the Community Planning and Physical Services Committee, which we have since done. So why are we here tonight? This is something we've been working on at a staff level for some time now. DOT had awarded us a $1.5 million grant to improve this intersection. There are a couple of key reasons behind the project. One is to provide additional capacity for both for existing and future demand. And the second main reason is to provide more accessibility for all users through the intersection. So over the past 18 months or so, engineering's developed several concept plans. They've conducted numerous meetings with stakeholders. They've hosted a public information session. They've incorporated public feedback wherever possible. They've met with the adjacent condo associations, adjacent neighbors, etc. And we worked hard to produce a concept plan that would meet the town's requirements, the DOT's requirements. And council will recall that we have a complete streets policy in effect that you endorsed, your predecessors endorsed some years back. So whatever we propose, we seek to be compatible with that policy too. So through the design effort, we reviewed the various concepts with our pedestrian and bicycle commission as well. Very important group for the town. They expressed some concerns regarding the preferred concept that we presented, that we had developed and identified and received a DOT endorsement of. PVC expressed some concerns. In their view, it didn't comply sufficiently with the complete streets policy, and they thought we needed an exception, which is why we're here tonight. We're seeking this exception. And because this project involves state grant monies, the exception needs to be approved by the town council. All other exceptions under the policy would be approved at my level. So in an effort to accommodate the PVC and the various stakeholders, the engineering division came up with the current concept plan. It provides 4-foot wide bicycle lanes in both directions. Our typical standard is 5-foot wide lanes. In this instance, we're looking at 4-foot wide lanes. The widening would impact a couple of properties which we're sensitive to. One of the properties is 5 Old Oak Road. You may recall the owner's testimony at the last meeting. That house is located approximately 25 feet from the existing roadway. The proposed plan would bring the roadway 2 feet closer to the house. However, that move would still be within the town's right-of-way. So there would not be a taking, no acquisition or easement required for that particular property. On the other side of the intersection at 3 Lovelace, we would need to widen the roadway by 8 feet. And in that instance, we would need an easement or a property acquisition. So we have been talking with the owners of both properties, and we think our conversations have been productive. So council had some concerns. We went back to CPPS recently. We talked about the various options that were available, and from a staff perspective, we still think that the concept plan we presented last time makes the most sense. Again, it incorporates the dedicated bicycle lanes in both directions. It would have 2 mid-block crosswalks and have left turning lanes, dedicated turning lanes in both directions as well. So as the legal traffic authority for the town, I delegate most of those duties to our town engineer, Dwayne Martin. But as the LTA, I am recommending council approval of this exception. And we're here to take any additional questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Winograd, do you want to, this came out of your committee, had a more in-depth discussion.
Thank you, and I don't have any questions, but I do have a couple comments. First, this has been a difficult process. I think the final results are the best that we can do with the geography of the location, and I certainly recommend that we move forward with it. That doesn't mean that it's perfect. I think that, and I want to thank all the various parties who contributed to the outcome. I think your staff has done an excellent job and been actually, very diligent in working through models. The fact that the recommended plan is not their original plan is sort of a credit to the process that has happened. The pedestrian and bike group also did their job properly. They have helped point out issues with the plan. The neighbors at 5 Old Oak appreciate their having come out and really giving us another perspective on it. And we certainly, and they helped. They helped the process by I think properly forcing us to go back to committee to review it again. But in the end, I think that a few things about the project are recommended going forward. We've sort of ignored it, but this will improve the intersection. This is state money going to make an intersection work better. There's a lot of traffic there. There are long tie-ups. Councilman Barnes has talked about, I know during your commute, I get there less frequently, but it's certainly an area that can use some help. The fact that we've been able to get what we know to be difficult process of getting state money for our projects is a big benefit. The fact that the bike lanes will be able to go in both ways in compliance with the map that we have drawn up for years. The plan is to have bike lanes go through there. We're fulfilling that real promise to those users of the roads. And finally, and ultimately in terms of the abutters, it's unfortunate. I mean, they are close to the property, to the road as it is, but certainly it is within the right of way. And really, as you've noted, normally that wouldn't even come to us. That is not something that we would get on every case, and frankly, to some extent, every time we're putting in lanes and Boulevard where we eliminated you eliminated parking on one side of the street, there are always going to be issues. We should listen to them, but in the end, I think it's a greater good for us to have the completion of the bike paths. So I do think we should go forward, but again, I do want to thank staff for this process. They took their time and I think got to the right outcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winograd. Anybody else? Mr. Barnes?
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank the town manager for continuing this from our last meeting. Clearly, there was a lot of information that was brought to us, and I wasn't really comfortable. I think my colleagues, some of them were, in the same position that we needed some more time to think about it, and we had an opportunity to bring this back to community planning last week and get into the details, and so I appreciate that extra opportunity. I agree with Mr. Winograd and his overview of kind of what's transpired here. I think for the record, to be clear, that the exception that we're talking about from the Complete Streets program that we have, relates solely to the removal of the sidewalk. That's the reason why, we're taking this up right now. And the rest of the changes that are being proposed and considered here are within, as the legal traffic authority and staff, your recommendations particularly with respect to, the two homeowners or residents on the west side, on the north and the south, that's something that would be normally within your purview, to make those decisions. And so the exception that we're, passing on tonight is with respect to the removal of the sidewalk. With respect to the two residents, I understand from staff that you've been in contact with them and working through those issues and are, comfortable or confident that you'll be able to, resolve the issues to their satisfaction, working with them to accomplish the overall goals of this project. One other comment that Mr. Winograd made with respect to eliminating parking on Boulevard, I think the footnote to that, as I recall, is that we actually canvassed that side of the street and there was no objection. So it was a situation where we actually went out and discussed that with the neighbors and didn't do that unilaterally. So I don't want anyone to think that we're coming for their, parking on their road anytime soon and doing it unilaterally. And then finally, as a general comment, yes, I commute through there, and I don't know if town staff can comment on this, but I think since our last hearing, the light has changed. And so now going north on Mountain, we queued back to Fern, so that was about an hour to get through the light. And if you're coming west on 44 to make the left onto Mountain, it's about 30 minutes. And it's tremendously unsafe because the turn signal is about 8 seconds and the northeast is about 2 minutes. And so your cars are out of the merge lane all the way back into the left lane, creating a very unsafe situation. So I didn't know that if you did that just to provide support for the project or whether somebody else was responsible for it. But I see Greg at the mic. If you could explain, I'd appreciate it.
Greg Summer with the engineering division. Allow me to apologize on behalf of the state. It is a state signal, so we can't take the blame for that one. I think it was just a signal malfunction. Ultimately, we identified it on Thursday last week, made a few phone calls with the state. I think they tried to go out on a couple different occasions to correct that issue. We looked at it again tonight. I think it was just happening during the PM commuting period, but it appeared to have been resolved this evening. And traffic was moving normally. So nothing to do with this project. So again, we
But it
apologize.
sounds like
on
it might
behalf
have
of the state.
I think it did. Thanks for the explanation, and thanks for all your work on this project. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Anything else? Okay, with that, we, again, I just want to thank staff for your persistence and patience with this project and creativity and trying to bring in all stakeholders and do its best in the best interest of the town. Thank you very much. Okay, all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. 6A, Ms. Kerrigan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move adoption of a resolution to amend the fiscal year 2018-2019 general fund budget to fund transfers to the debt service fund, utility service fund, and the capital project fund.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Mr. Hart?
Thank you, Mayor. So we are
Gutierrez.
seeking council approval of these transfers here. We're projecting a surplus from the current year. We'll have more information on that in the coming weeks that we'll present to the Finance and Budget Committee. But right now, we are seeking to utilize a portion of the anticipated surplus. Some of the transfers that we are requesting were contemplated as part of the budget adoption for next year, and others are an effort on our part to mitigate a tax impact in the following fiscal year for FY21 itself. So if you look at the actual resolution itself, you can see the dollars for what we're seeking to achieve here. On the revenue side, we would be increasing the education cost-sharing grant by $525,000, the payment in lieu of taxes grant by $350,000, interest income by $675,000. And then on the appropriation side, we're seeking a transfer to the debt service fund of $950,000, and that is primarily to mitigate against future tax increases, because under our debt service schedule, we are anticipating a spike in debt service for FY21. We're also seeking a transfer of $300,000 to the Utility Services Fund as contemplated when you adopted the budget for next fiscal year, and a transfer to the Capital Non-Recurring Expenditure Fund of $300,000 to fund smaller capital projects. So seeking your support here, we're also looking for some money to go into the Property Revaluation Fund, $300,000. Reval is coming up for 10/1/2020. So I've got Mr. Privatera here, our Director of Finance, who can assist me with any questions council members may have.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Are there questions for Mr. Hart or Mr. Privatera? Mr. Barnes.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Hart, so we have a budget surplus, right? And the last notes that I saw from Finance and Budget indicated that we had about a 2.7 million operating surplus, correct? So we prepare our budget. At the end of the year, we look at it. We have a surplus of 2.7 million. Then there's some offsets. Some departments, go over budget. Some come under budget. We get some extra state money. We get some extra tax revenue, and we put that all into a pile, and we come up with, I think, what we have somewhere around 1.9 million for this year. Last year, I guess the budget ending in 18, it was about 2.5 million of surplus as well. And so for the folks that are watching to understand what we're doing here, we have a budget, we have a surplus, and we're allocating that money into different places at the close of the budget year. You mentioned that the purpose is to mitigate future tax increases, and I was wondering if you could just explain what you mean by mitigating future tax increases.
I'd be happy to do that. And I would ask Mr. Privatera to come forward, and he can add to my comments. So first of all, the anticipated surplus for the current year is greater than the aggregate amount we're seeking transfers for tonight. This is only a partial resolution of the current year anticipated surplus. But in response to Councilor Barnes' question directly, since we're in a position where we're anticipating a healthy surplus for the current year, and some of that is due to state grants coming in higher than anticipated, some of it is also due to departments managing expenditures. There were some staffing vacancies that allowed us to save money, et cetera. We're looking down the road, and I'll cite one example, is the debt service fund. So the debt service is something we pay every year. In looking at FY21, another year out, we're anticipating that our debt service is going to spike somewhat. So what we're recommending is that we set some money aside now to help pay for that, to mitigate future tax increase in that fiscal year. Mr. Privatera, I don't know if you'd like to elaborate at all on my comments.
Sure. Pete Privatera, Director of Finance. Our last projection that we presented to Finance and Budget in May indicated about a $3.4 million surplus. And that surplus was approximately $1 million in additional state aid, about $1 million in savings from the Board of Education, primarily due to payroll savings, and about $1 million of revenue increases related to investment income. We did a lot better in investment income than we anticipated. And the difference of that $400,000 was a variety of ups and downs in revenues and operating departments. As the town manager said, when we look at surplus, we look at three areas. One is to try to offset any future liabilities. Another area that we looked at is during the budget review process with the town manager, we told department directors it was going to be a tight budget year. So if you're looking for vehicles or equipment, unless you really, really have to have it, we're going to hold off on those purchases and see if we have some funds available at the end of the fiscal year. And we try as best we can to take any additional surplus and put it into the CNRE fund just to offset any potential future liabilities that are unforeseen, or if we want to offset any CNRE expenses in fiscal year '21. Well, the $300,000 for utility services, we reported to council during the adoption process that if we put $300,000 in the utility services fund, we can reduce utilities by $100,000 in '20 and reduce it again in '21 and '22. The $300,000 for revaluation, when we were going through the budget review process with the assessor, we knew a reval was coming, but he didn't know what the impact would be. So we said, fine, we'll wait. When we have a better handle on the number, if we have any surplus at the end of the year, we'll set it aside. The cost is going to be $600,000. So our plan is to use $300,000 now, put it into the capital fund for the reval account. Next fiscal year, we go through the fiscal year. If we're fortunate enough to have a surplus, we can tack on $300,000 of that, and that'll pay for the reval, or we can look at other options, either CNRE or we budget for it directly. The $950,000 transfer, we were expecting a significant impact, a significant spike in debt service in 2021. This year, we were fortunate. We were able to use some bond premium, and we had some money in our debt service fund balance that we were able to apply against our debt service payment for fiscal year '20 to mitigate that increase. But we're looking at a year-to-year increase of about $1.7 million. So I asked the town manager to consider using $950,000, plus if we applied a $350,000 bond premium like we do every year, then we'll be looking at an increase of about $480,000, which is a lot more manageable than $1.7 million. So that's the rationale behind this. Now, when another finance and budget meeting is set up, I'm going to be reporting to council on our expectations for how we want to use the remaining fund balance, and it could be $3.4 million in total. We could go up a couple $100,000 more before the end of the fiscal year, but the town manager and I have discussed a proposal to council on how we want to use that money, where we want to put it, and some vehicles and equipment we're looking to purchase. So that's where we stand right now.
All right. Well, I appreciate the explanation. I understand it's a way to kind of smooth, the ups and downs through the budget. My concern is that, when we think about our budgets and we have a surplus at the end, and it was something that I actually spoke about on budget night, was that if, along with other ideas, to be able to use surplus, if we could dedicate surplus and bring it forward along with revenue generated from grand list growth and some other, tight fiscal management of our budget, at least on the town side, it could be possible to get to kind of a no tax increase budget. And when we're talking about, 2 years ago, $2.5 million, and this year, I guess $3.5 million, when our town side of our budget is going up, $4.5 million, we're getting pretty close in terms of number when we factor in that grand list growth as well. And so, I think as we talk about on budget night, there are ways to get there, and one way could be using, some or all of this surplus and applying it to the budget increase. And to the extent we have other concerns about assessors and other folks in departments getting their jobs done or vehicles that they need, that they budget for them, that they find a way in their budget to come within the numbers or guidance that you've provided to them to meet that, and they keep it in their budget, and that to the extent that we've gone out to our taxpayers and essentially overtax them in a given year to render that surplus, that we take that money and roll it forward and apply it to the following year budget. Now, I recall on budget night, one of my colleagues saying that it was impossible to get a no increase budget. But I think if we look at how we're allocating these monies, it makes it more reasonable, and actually I think a reality that we could get there in the coming years if we used or applied some or all of this money to, future budget increases.
Just want to make one comment against that. We're kind of doing that now, because if we have a surplus at the end of the year and we put it in CNRE, then we use that surplus to offset any direct general fund contribution to CNRE. So if we have a zero general fund contribution to CNRE, we're appropriating that from the CNRE fund. So one of the recommendations we'll probably make when I come back to you at the next Finance and Budget Committee meeting is to take a big chunk of that surplus and put it in CNRE, And then when we sit down and we review the requirements for the fiscal year '21 budget, we may choose to recommend that we use that money that we set aside for a CNRE purchase so it wouldn't have a direct tax implication.
Sure. Yeah, and I appreciate that clarification. What I'm saying is that it's actually put into the budget, so we're not having to go into CNRE. I understand that there are circumstances that are unexpected that come up in the budget year, and having some of that money accessible is important. But the thought is that if we could get it all into the budget that we put the mill rate on, the one that goes out to our residents to be paid, that we try and get that as close to zero. So we're certainly not in a deficit situation, but not, with a substantial surplus either.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Mr. Hart.
Just a few additional points, and I respect Councilor Barnes' thoughts and arguments that he's presented here. The timing, especially on the revenue side, the adoption of the state budget doesn't match up well with the adoption of the town's budget because we have the same fiscal year. So oftentimes, or at least in recent years, you'll adopt a budget with an estimate on state aid, and then the actual number is different. I also think that the last couple of years are somewhat atypical in terms of the size of the surplus. And then lastly, we have to be careful about funding operating expenses utilizing surplus because we run the risk of building in a structural deficit within the budget. We are doing that to some extent. We're utilizing it for utilities. We're utilizing the monies for debt service, but I think we'd have to be careful about relying on surplus to fund much more with respect to day-to-day operations. But would be very happy to continue the conversation at the committee level.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Hart.
Just
Mr.
one
Barnes,
last
yeah.
comment. I mean, I'm not suggesting trying to create surplus to offset a future increase. If there is no surplus, then it wouldn't apply. But when we have it, to be able to use it to apply. And certainly in looking at the experience over the last year, it's not going to be every year where, say, the Board of Education is going to give us back $1.1 million because of some savings that they've experienced. But since we weren't counting on that anyway, right? That's $1.1 million certainly that we could allocate to offsetting a budget increase in the next year. And certainly we wouldn't anticipate, a $1.4 million deficit from the fire department because of, termination pay and overtime year over year. So I know there's some departments that give back and there's some that don't. And sometimes the Board of Ed does and sometimes it uses all of its money. But at the end of the day, if there is a surplus, identifying some of that along with the increase in the grand list could get us down the road towards a lot lower tax increase from our residents. So I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. I just would like to put a little, the timing is a big issue and why we generate a surplus, because people probably are asking, why is there a surplus? And the last couple of years have been a little bit more unpredictable. The last 3 years, I would say, the swings have been rather big. There have been talk of some items that would have fairly substantial impacts on our budget that we sort of took middle roads on to hedge against a significant budget, and I will say crisis, or managing our way. We are a AAA bond-rated community. Our rating agencies expect us to be forward-thinking and responsible and not take short-term gains, to be always looking at the long horizon. And so out of our $300 million budget, a $3 million surplus is 1%. So it's being 1 million coming from the Board of Education, 1 million from grants. So a lot of that is coming as a dynamic from the Board of Education. We try really hard to predict what's going to happen 18 months in advance of when it does happen. So we work really, really hard on that. And one of the ways that we actually have remained a AAA bond-rated community is by using surplus in the funding of these funds to to mitigate the fluctuations. When utilities were fluctuating and we weren't managing them as well because we've invested in all these, ways to reduce and control our consumption, we did have a utilities fund that helped to mitigate the ups and downs that we had established about 5 years ago. The debt service fund also, many communities will use bond premium one time to benefit 1 year, but then dig a hole for the following year. So those those are not AAA bond rated communities that behave in a way that is a short-term gain that is not planned out and what's going to happen next year, because they ask those questions. How have you used your surplus? So, and if it's for tax benefit only, that is a difficult discussion. If you say we're pre-funding fluctuations in a fund, it's a much more credible and responsible argument and way to handle that. So, any other questions or comments? All right, with that, all those in favor? Okay. Okay. Yep. All right, motion carries. Now I lost my screen. One more minute. Town manager report, 7A. Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Mayor. I've loaded my report in board docs here. I've got a few items I'd like to report on. First of all, I'd like to talk about our return to biweekly recycling and the new yard waste program. The council's pretty familiar with this. This is something staff had recommended and you approved as part of the budget process for the fiscal year that begins on July 1. But more for the benefit of the community, folks who may be watching tonight. So beginning next week, we're going to switch back to biweekly recycling, and we're going to introduce a new biweekly yard waste collection program. So some of the key reasons behind staff's recommendation and behind the decision that the council made. The primary reason is that the pilot we conducted, the 2-year pilot for weekly recycling collection, resulted in only a 1.4% increase in the recycling rate. And at an incremental cost of approximately $400,000, it was hard to justify that we continue the weekly collection. Furthermore, yard waste has been a key issue in town for many years now. We're optimistic that the new program will prove successful and help remove a significant percentage of yard waste that winds up in people's trash bins. Now, we all know yard waste, people aren't permitted to deposit their yard waste in trash bins, but it does happen. And when our waste disposal facility becomes aware of the fact that our trash is contaminated with yard waste, we are fined accordingly. So we're hoping that the new yard waste collection program is successful and that it helps us out in that area as well. Now, for residents who have recycling needs, and we really appreciate people's commitment to recycling, if they would like a second barrel, they can subscribe to Paynes. Residents can subscribe to Paynes for a second recycling barrel at an annual cost of approximately $80 a year. So for $80 a year, you can have a second recycling barrel that will be picked up on the same biweekly schedule. And then also, residents who are interested can always drop off their recyclable items at our yard waste and recycling center at 17 Brixton Street. And people who are interested can find more detail on these two options on our town's website. Moving on, an update on the Park Road I-84 interchange project. It's reaching some critical stages here. Over the past couple of weeks, we've been reconstructing Park Road between Raymond and Thompson. We had experienced some weather delays, but we're moving forward. The contractor will be back out paving tomorrow. So on completion of paving that section, we're going to move to Phase 4 of the project. And in Phase 4, the contractor will be removing pavement and reconstructing the north side of Park Road between the off-ramp and Trout Brook Drive. And in order to do this safely, we need to close off the work zone to all traffic 24 hours per day for approximately a 3-week period. So we realize that that is a significant period. It's probably the most significant delay that we'll experience as part of this project. We'll have signed detours in place, and traffic movements will be restricted. So we are recommending that our motorists seek other alternatives, avoid that area if at all possible, utilize interchange 41, 42, or 44. Those are all other options for the traveling public. But we're moving forward. We're entering phase 4. There are 7 phases in the project overall. We have had a few delays. The completion of the project is pushed out to, I think, roughly October. But this next phase, phase 4, is probably where we'll experience the most inconvenience, where the traveling public will experience the most inconvenience. But when the project's done, we'll all be much better off. So sticking with the paving theme, we are shortly going to be moving into round 2 of 3 rounds of paving. Every year we try to do 3 rounds. Round 1 is nearing completion. It's gone pretty well. I've listed the roads we're going to be repaving as part of round 2. They're listed in my report. Davenport Road, Laurel Drive, Richmond Lane, Richmond Road, Day Road, Hilldale Road, I think it's Peyote Road, and Quaker Lane South. And there was a section of Quaker Lane South that was paved just last year, but there was an issue with the quality of the asphalt, so the contractor needs to resurface it at their expense. Moving on, a couple other things I'd like to report on. We were talking earlier about the town's bond rating and debt service. Last Friday, on the 21st, we announced the sale of a little under $20 million in bonds that we sold to refinance bonds that we had previously issued. So as a result of the financing, the town will realize a total of $1.85 million in savings over the next 6 fiscal years. The present value is a little under $1.8 million. It's 8% of the face value of the prior bonds. We were hoping for between 2 and 3%. We realized 8%, which is significantly greater. Now, this savings will reduce the remaining debt service payments associated with the bonds that the town issued for the Blueback Square project. And the final year will be fiscal year 26. So because of our strong bond rating, because of our strong financial management, we received orders for up to, I think it's $51.3 million in bonds, more than 2.5 times the amount of bonds that were offered. And I think the results we achieved really a testament, a credit to our collective efforts. You know, the council working with the management team to manage our finances in a very prudent and responsible way. We talk a lot about our bond rating. We talk a lot about fund balance. I think this demonstrates why all those things are important. I'd like to commend our finance director, Mr. Privatera, and our consulting team for their really good work on this transaction, as well as you for your prudent management over the past many years. Just a couple of other items. The Brace Road parking lot, that's a lot that the town leases from a private owner, as the council is aware. We're going to be converting that lot. That'll be the latest lot that we're going to convert to the kiosk system in the first part of July, next month. So whenever we do a conversion, we're going to have our parking attendants on hand to assist customers and act as ambassadors, if you will, during the transition. The 30-minute grace period will still be available. We've received a number of questions about that, just like it's in place for the Farmington Avenue lot. So when you utilize the kiosk, there's an option to select a 30-minute free option. 2 more things quickly. June is dog license renewal month. June is rapidly ending here, so I know our town clerk's office had sent out reminders to over 3,000 dog owners here in town. We're encouraging folks, if you haven't come out and licensed your dog yet, please do so to keep Fido legal, if you will. And then last but certainly not least, something I hadn't written up here, council has been asking about the status of state funding for the North Main Street Bridge project. Very important project for us. We are relying on, we've been expecting over $900,000 in state grant monies for that project. That bridge is over 100 years old. It's in critical need of repair. It serves over 20,000 cars per day. The state, I think largely due to its debt diet, had put a number of projects in municipalities across the state on hold. This project is included in that. We are working with our delegation, the mayor and I and staff. We are in frequent communication with our delegation to encourage DOT to release the monies for this very important project. It doesn't just serve the town of West Hartford, it serves many of our adjoining communities who are commuting through West Hartford to jobs, what have you, throughout the region. So that completes my report. Mayor, happy to take any questions council members may have.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Any questions? Mr. Sweeney?
Matt, if it's possible, can you help or work with the communications department to help provide some sort of update that you provided here to us on 84 in a more communicative form to the public, I think, and helping them with the detours? I know that's one of the biggest things I hear about from folks is just which way to go. When I know that we get the information, I just don't know if it's communicated outward as much as it could right now, and it'd be great. I think it'd be really helpful to folks, and they would appreciate that. Particularly, I think everyone appreciates the fruits of the last round of construction. I know I particularly do. With Exit 43, I mean, it's been a total game changer. But and then just communicating out when and where and how with the latest round would be fantastic if you could do that.
Very good. We've got a dedicated project page. We've been putting out some information, and we'll certainly work to do more. Perhaps there's more we can do with social media, for example.
Yes, similar ways that you've communicated about surveys and things of that nature, I think, and working with the local media on would be great. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Thank you, Mr. Hart. Ms. Kerrigan actually had something. Okay.
Quick question. Can you talk a little bit about the yard waste barrels?
Thank you. I forgot to mention that, didn't I? So for yard waste collection, there's a couple of ways that can happen. One option for residents is to utilize the leaf bags that I think many in our community are familiar with. You know, they're biodegradable. You can buy them at almost any store. So you can deposit your yard waste in those bags, put them out at the curb the same day that your recycling is picked up. However, you can also, if you'd like, purchase a dedicated bin. It's also 96 gallons. It's the same size as the trash bin and the recycling bin. It's brown in color, I believe, and that costs, I think, is approximately $73, $74, but you own the barrel. It's yours. It's yours forever. So you can utilize that. You can utilize that for your yard waste as well. Thank you for that question, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I had that on my list, too. Mr. David.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have three questions, and two of them have to do with the refunding bond sale. It's my recollection that the council authorized the administration to go forward with the refunding on budget adoption. Is that correct, Mr. Hart?
Yes.
Okay. And the next question with respect to the refunding bond sale is we're not extending the period of time that the bonds would be repaid. They're still going to be within the same time frame that they would end in 2026.
Correct. We're sticking with the same schedule.
Okay.
So we'll be paying roughly $300,000 less per year.
Right. And then my next question is, we're going to be issuing bonds in the next fiscal year. Did we get any indication from either Moody's or Standard & Poor's or Bond Counsel or advisor as to what we can anticipate when we do go to issue bonds for the projects we authorized in the 1920 budget?
No, we were really focused on this sale in particular. So we will, when that time comes, it's a team effort to prepare for the ratings call. Quite often, the mayor participates as well as chair of finance and budget. But for this last go-round, we were focused on this sale.
Thank you for your answers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. David. Mr. Barnes?
With respect to the bond refi, first, congratulations, Peter, Town Manager. You know, certainly a great result. And as Mr. Davidoff said, it doesn't extend the bond period, and certainly the savings will come in handy since we've had some issues with revenue in that fund in making the payment, so it's perfect timing to be able to smooth that over. So congratulations, very nice work. Point of clarification on the kiosks for parking. You mentioned that for the 30 minutes, you go to the kiosk, you push a button, you get a ticket. I'm wondering whether you even need to go to the kiosk if you're there for 30 minutes or less. Can't you just go in? You won't get a ticket for that 30 minutes because it's, you know, because you don't get charged for it, and then just exit. Do you actually have to get a ticket if you know?
I believe you need to use the kiosk for that option, so that the attendants, they need to know the time you came in.
So is there still going to be an attendant there? If we're using the kiosk, are we going to have?
No, the attendant may be the wrong term. The enforcement officer for that particular lot. So they need to know
when you came in.
Correct.
To be able to start the clock.
Correct.
Okay, so for our residents who usually would just go in and go out, they actually have to go to the kiosk.
That's what we're recommending.
I got you.
Yes.
I got you. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Thank you, Mr. Hart. Anything else? I just also want to thank Mr. Privatera and the commitment of the town that has made to be I think fiscally responsible, and that benefit really was clear in this bond sale, especially the amount of interest, which is really reflects on the responsibility, how responsible investors think our community is. Okay, I have announcements. Playhouse on Park presents the Scottsboro Boys. Piece of History with the Summer Musical opens tomorrow, June 26th, runs through August 4th. Nominated for a staggering 12 Tony Awards. We'll have you tapping your toes and hollering for justice at the tables, are turned on one of the most infamous events in American history. 9 African-American men accused of a crime they did not commit. Tickets range from $40 to $50. For more information, call the box office, 860-523-5900, or go to playhouseonpark.org. Summer Family Dance Party is the library's children's division on June 27th, Thursday night, in Blueback Square from 6:30 to 7:30. Merry Wives of Windsor. Summer is the perfect time for Shakespeare Under the Stars. Capitol Classics presents The Merry Wives of Windsor, a bawdy, riotous romp that starts with romp that starts one of Shakespeare's most beloved comic characters, Falstaff, an impoverished knight in search of wealth, sets his sights on 2 married wealthy women. Little does he know these merry wives have a few tricks up their sleeves. The event is held outside the campus of the University of St. Joseph. The show runs July 11th to July 28th, Thursday through Sunday. Tickets are $18 for adults, $12 for senior citizens and children. Go to capitalclassics.org on stage. Free concerts at Blueback Square and performances at Webster Walk are almost every week. Please check out the calendar by going to westhartfordct.gov/Blueback Square and click on the calendar. Coming up in July, Lime Rock Motor Car Stroll will be held on Saturday, July 13th, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. on Isham Road at Blueback Square. The event is free. Also, Taste of Blueback Square will be held on Wednesday, July 31st in the Raymond Road lot from 5:30 to 8:30. Tickets are $40 for general admission and $50 for VIP. Go to bluebacksquare.com/events for tickets. I also want to wish everyone a very happy and safe July 4th weekend. Happy birthday, U.S. All right. That's it for all my announcements. Any other announcements? Mr. Davidoff?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just would like the public to know that Thursday, June 27th, the Hartford Golf Club will be setting off fireworks for people that live in close proximity and have pets or other individuals residing in their home that are afraid of loud noises like that. May this serve as some type of notice requirement that this is going to be taking place this Thursday evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davidoff. We have had a couple of questions on fireworks. Mr. Hart, do you want to, I don't know if you have your email. You can, research.
I can elaborate. So we've been asked whether or not, to what extent the town can limit fireworks displays and actually consulted with Mr. Lair. Fireworks are regulated expressly by the state, so the town doesn't have the ability to establish a different regulations. What we can do, however, and what our fire marshal has worked successfully to do, is to encourage or require the applicant to provide notice to the community. So this year, I believe the permittee for Wampanoag Golf Course, their fireworks were last week. They provided advance notice of the event some weeks back and circulated it to, I think, well over 1,000 homes in the community. Hartford Golf Course will have to do something similar. I think one of the issues we face is because we're such a densely built community, you know, in terms of notice, you can hear those fireworks virtually anywhere in town. And, you know, within a mile or two of each course, we have thousands of homes. So notice really needs to go to the larger community. And what more can we do to work with the applicant? You know, we'll continue to explore options using social media, et cetera.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. I often say we have the best town clerk in the state of Connecticut, and we actually have a master clerk, and I want to congratulate Essie LeBreau on her. We're very lucky to have her talents and her commitment to the town of West Hartford and her expertise in master. Okay. Any other announcements? That's it? Okay. Reports from Corporation Counsel, Mr. Lair.
I have no formal report. We have no need for executive session.
Awesome. Any questions for Mr. Lair? Okay. Communications, number 12.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move receipt of two communications, one from Louise Saraz as 6/14/2019 resigning from the Commission on Veteran Affairs, and one from Tiffany Donaldson, 6/14/2019 resigning as Town Council Zoning Alternate.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? I don't, motion carries. I don't think we have to vote on that. But anyway, thank you for your service. Nothing on the consent calendar, no petitions, no executive session. I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. Good night.